Eche, welcome to Susu podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really weird. So we bumped into each other in Kigali.
Yeah.
Rwanda last year,
Mm-hmm.
and we were actually supposed to meet up because I knew I recognized you from somewhere.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, I know this face.
Yeah.
And we were like, oh, let's just meet up. There's an event happening, and I just got incredibly overwhelmed and tired. I think I ended up just sleeping that particular night when you guys went out. I just couldn't make it. I was exhausted after the 3-4 days of the event. Back to back. It was a lot. So I was there for philanthropy. You were in Kigali for tech.
Yeah, the Mobile World Congress. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we were there for APF, and it was really, really nice experience.
Yeah.
So it's kind of full circle again. We've got another opportunity. I found that you were in town. I was like, I just have to sit down with you.
Good timing.
It's good timing, honestly. And a lot of the things, I just feel like the universe just moves in such a way.
Serendipity.
It just moves and it just gets things done for us. So just focusing on what it is that needs to be done, and the universe will just figure out how to do it. And it couldn't be a better time. And a lot of the reason why I say that is because of what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
I really want to delve into what is going on in Afropolitan at the moment. The work that you guys have done over the last few years, and the new projects that you have, which are very, very exciting, because when I hear your wife talk about it, I'm just like, we need to know more. This is incredible. In some ways I'll probably say it's coming before its time. It's, a very futuristic type of projects that you guys are doing. But before we get to that, I want to go back. And I always like to go back because I always want to understand the psychology behind the person that I'm speaking to. So tell us about your upbringing, the life of Eche, and how you came to be who it is that you are today. Just paint me a picture of that.
Yeah, Eche was born. Eche was born in 1990, August 26th, in Enugu, Nigeria. I moved to Lagos when I was about 10, so around 2000. I would say I was a kid who is very a voracious reader. I ruined my eyesight just by consistently reading. Even when NEPA would take light, I'm the one who's with a candle light just poring over books. And I think I learned to escape with the books. I felt very, very my imagination could run wild as long as he gave me a book. And we had a library in the house, so I would just consistently
library in your house?
Yeah, I'm talking about an actual library, not just a couple of books.
Who was the curator of that library?
I think my granddad, he was a lawyer, so he had collected so many books over time. So I would just go in there and just consistently pick up a new book and read and consistently read and just develop frameworks. And so in 2000 we moved to Lagos. By 2006, we moved to the U.S., California, Northern California to be exact. And I finished up high school where I was the only black kid in the set. That definitely informed my worldview because I was introduced to the concept of blackness or whiteness from that, because being in Nigeria, it wasn't necessarily a concept that we struggled with.
How old were you?
15.
When you realized you were black?
When I realized I was black, and then there was a distinction that mattered to me. And so you're like, wait, so where in the totem pole am I? And you're like, oh, okay, cool. The lowest rung in society. Oh, okay, cool. All right, got it. So what are we doing here? And I think I'm in the school and the white kids are coming up to me and they're not distinguishing between Nigerian black or African-American black or Caribbean black. It was blackity black. Everyone's here.
Interesting.
So they expect you to know everything that has to do with blackness, right? And so the whole idea with that was I've never been introduced to this world of I have to prove myself as somebody who represents all of blackness. But what it did for me, though, was it made me want to go learn about different cultures of blackness, right? And when I did, I fell in love with all of it, the entire spectrum. I was like, yo, this is dope. This is great. This is amazing. I see now why this is so cool. And my whole thing was when it was time for college, I had to go to college. I had another black person. That was my criteria. I didn't care about the ranking. And so the first university I attend, the first black person I see, I walk up to him like, hey, where are you from? And he's like, Edo State, Nigeria. I'm like,
Never.
say less. I was like, I looked at my parents like, I'm going here. Like all the other schools I got into, it's okay. Here's the place we're going to. So, but what happens is I start university and I'm expecting this whole Wakanda type feeling. And it was like, no, we don't all like each other. I'm like, why? Because it was almost like I was going through I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it was an allegory of the cave moment, which is like I've come out from a cave where in the cave, which is the high school I was in, they were worshiping blackness and they think blackness is so super cool and they don't know the distinction between anything. It's just more of like, this is the entire spectrum of cool. And then when I come out and I'm trying to go to the black tribes, I'm like, we're all fighting. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, they think it's all cool. So what's the division about? Blackness.
Yeah, so everybody's just feeling like this thing was cool, but then the moment you sort of, immersed yourself into it, you now realize that they're all at war.
Yeah, we're all at war. And, and I'm like, what's the war about? And they could never tell me like a concrete answer. It was these slights that happened over time and then they've compounded. And I'm like, okay, but do you actually really know about each other's cultures in an in-depth way? And what I would always say to them, because I ended up being president of like the NSAs and the ASAs and all that type of stuff, it was like, look, when we all talk to each other, it's like there's a white man in the middle doing the interpreting. And we need to figure out how to remove that white. Obviously, the white man is not a specific white man, but it's more like the media.
The metaphor, yeah.
And the metaphor for that. And it's like, how do we tell our own stories in a real and authentic way? And thankfully, as that's happening in my life, you now have technology that's coming out, whether it's like things like Instagram or Snapchat that allow you to do first view stories where when I would come back home, right, for December or whatever, I'm recording and I'm showing people my life, my village house, everything. And you're having my friends back being like, wait, that's Nigeria? That's you guys know the Migos? You guys, and I'm like, yes, this is real. And you could tell that over time that compounded because it started to shift the narrative of what people thought Africa was, right? So
what year was this?
This was at least between like 2012 to about 2018 that culminated in the whole year of return that happened in 2019. But the idea was, I already started doing events, right? I started doing events right out of college when I was 18 or 19. I was doing 21 plus events, and these were Afrobeats events. So parties, concerts, and then eventually festivals. And the idea was this is a space for us to celebrate our culture in a very authentic way. And in doing that, then we transitioned into the first phase of Afropolitan. But the idea is my childhood or my psychology was informed by these moments where I'm like, blackness is dope, but for some reason we've not been able to communicate that and capture that in a real way. And so my other frameworks then started as we transitioned to like Afropolitan and other parts of it.
So how long has Afropolitan been going on?
So I think the best way to even understand the Afropolitan journey is to think about it in 3 phases, right? Phase 1 of Afropolitan is an organization we started while in law school in 2016, catering to the African diaspora through events. So think Afrobeats parties, concerts, festivals. We started out of the Bay Area, California, which is the San Francisco, Silicon Valley area, catering to the techies. So you're talking about the people who work in places like Facebook, Google, YouTube, Netflix. And then also when the African founders also came over to raise money, they would then come to the events as well. So that was the community of people we catered to. A significant highlight of what we achieved in phase 1 was something called the Year of Return that happened in Ghana in 2019, where about 1 million plus people from the diaspora came out to Ghana. It generated about $2 billion worth of economic activity, right? And so there, Afropolitan played a role in helping facilitate things like visa on arrivals. You can imagine most people, it was their first time coming. So whether it was transportation to the hotels or from the hotels to the events, local currency exchange, local SIM cards, just really providing a holistic service, right? And so we expected to reload that come 2020, and then COVID happens, right? COVID decimates the entire in real life events industry. And so we pivoted into media, but through a social audio app called Clubhouse.
I remember, because I used to listen in on some of the Clubhouse rooms. Yeah. And there was a lot going on in there.
There was a lot going on.
And I noticed that there was a lot of learning and pivoting and sort of discovering how we're going to get this thing to work.
Yeah.
And just to be able to connect people in a very organic and authentic way.
Yeah. And I think it was and between I and my co-founder Chika, we built communities under about 200,000 people collectively, right? And I think it was the first time, like I remember when I go on Clubhouse, I'm like, yo, this is the first time that we're able to organize ourselves around shared values at scale. Like people who, because you remember it was invite only at the time. And what it did for someone like me was I knew who to invite because we already had the list of people. Like I had thousands of people on my phone from years of like doing events. And so you could literally invite the community into the rooms and you grew your community from there, right? And you could do it intentionally because you didn't have to like, send to all lists. You could literally know who it was you were inviting and then they could use their invite to invite
everybody,
Yeah. And then you intentionally create the right sort of vibe because you have the right sort of people in the rooms, right? And then we were able to do things like the End SARS protests, raise money for it. For the Ethiopian refugee crisis during the war, we raised money for that too. And phase 3 then starts in April 2021 when I'm in Senegal, Dakar, and this man, Balaji Srinivasan, he releases this article called How to Start a New Country. And in the article, he advocates for this idea of a network state, which is different from a nation state. And in a network state, it's a highly aligned online community with a capacity for collective action that's able to crowdfund territory around the world and eventually gain diplomatic recognition from pre-existing states. In a short summary of what that means is you're creating the first ever internet country, right? Because you're asking yourself, what does the internet enable us to do today? We've been able to start new companies on the internet, right? So Google, Facebook, Susu. We've been able to start new currencies on the internet, so Bitcoin, crypto. The question is, can we start a new country on the internet, right? And it's the evolution of how we organize ourselves because the internet enables us to organize around shared values at scale, right? So I was explaining to Gideon earlier, like, look, imagine you're here in Lagos, somebody else is in Rwanda, somebody else is in New Zealand, somebody else is in Australia, but we can organize ourselves around shared values at scale because we have the same interests or beliefs or norms. And with that, we now have a capacity for collective action that transcends borders, right? And so that is in a nutshell what Afropolitan is looking to achieve, which is the first ever internet country. And the question is, what is our why? Right? And our why was basically informed. We drew inspiration from the Federalist Papers from the US, where Anthony Hamilton, he's a US founding father, basically argues as to why they're starting the United States of America with a new constitution. And he says, is it possible for societies of men to achieve a constitution or a governance through reflection and choice? Or are we forever destined to depend on our governance through accident and force? I remember reading that and we're like, yo, that is our why. No modern day nation state in Africa was created by reflection and choice. It was always through accident and force. And we've suffered the consequences of that till today, right? And so what we're saying is imagine a world in which we can start a new country with people you have shared values with. We can reflect and then choose the world that we want to live in the society we want to live in, and then we thrive from that. And our ideology is one of abundance instead of scarcity, because we feel like scarcity has wreaked havoc across Africa. We're not able to play long-term games with long-term people. We're not able to even compound over here, right? And then you have a lot of scarcity that's affected not just the minds, but the resources and how we're able to organize as people. So we want to challenge that at its source. So, yeah.
So as I'm trying to sort of picture this world, this borderless world, right, that is able to transact and is able to interact and create exponential value across organizational type of agendas and structures. How does the reality of the borders of these individual locations, how do you see that creating a restriction to what can actually be done in this virtual country?
Yeah, so I think the idea is when you think through it, that's why we have 4 phases, right? So I'll break down the phases real quick. First phase is building the network, right? Where we're attracting the best of the best Africa and the diaspora have to offer across, and allies as well, across different fields like sports, media, art, tech, finance. And that's phase 1. Phase 2 is what we're calling government as a service, which is imagine a world in which you have a platform where you can do things like self-sovereign ID, registering your companies, being able to make payments with Afropolitan currencies. It could be in an app format. It could just be a digital platform in of itself. Phase 3 is what we're calling the minimum viable state, which is how do you build up the credibility needed to be viewed as a country. So what are the services you can offer to people today that let them be like, okay, cool, like we actually trust you more than we trust our actual government. So for example, today Afropolitan handles visa and arrival services for African countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania, and we were also recognized by the New York Stock Exchange as the first ever internet country for the African diaspora.
So this has already gone through. This is something that you guys have already laid foundations for. It's already active.
It's active. It's active.
How many people do you currently have in the community?
So we released our first 500 passports last December. We sold out of it. So as of today, we have 500 plus citizens active, right? Like this is on chain. This is verifiable. This isn't just like, hey, we have 2 million people who follow us on Instagram, but you don't really know what that really leads to. No. We have passports active. We have passports out there. We have 500 citizens today. Right.
So in terms of mobility, right, are there mobility restrictions for these individuals in this virtual world? Because if someone's listening in right now and they'll be like, I'm not tech, I don't understand this virtual world, I really don't get it. Okay, you've got a passport, but does that passport allow you to physically move from one place to the next? Or is it just in this virtual world in terms of where I can transact?
Yeah, so today you cannot use the passport to like go to a country and like, hey, give me admission in with this. But the idea is you will eventually be able to do that, right? But in the meantime, that passport can give you access to other things, right? So whether it's access to events, whether they're physical, access to resources, access to opportunities, access to funding. If you're a founder, there are different levels of access that the passport can give you. And if you're a Afropolitan citizen, right? And it's more of like those benefits also expand over time. And the way to think about it, because sometimes when people think about virtual, they think about like a metaverse type thing. Virtual, we spend 60% of, if you have a phone, most of us spend 60% of our time online, right? You're already virtual most of your time. So if you dictate your time versus like how much you actually spend online, you are virtual, right? So what we're saying is the services now, for example, let's say you want to order food, you do maybe something like an Uber Eats or like a Glovo or something, right? That's a virtual service, right? If you want to do laundry and you can, all the services that you up your banking online, like look at a bank like Kuda, right? So I think it's more of like people's mindset being rearranged to realize like most of the services that you deal with are online. Like digital banks 10, 20 years ago were like, what is that? But now you have Kuda that has like 4 million users. So the services that you get can be online. Your governance can also be online. Now the question is, how does that then interact in the physical, right? And what we're saying is it's the same way. What we're just saying is our own governance, because it's going to be borderless, it's going to be more virtual than on the physical, right? And the physical part will be there anyway, because in phase 4, that's the land piece. We want to combine 2 concepts together. One is a Chinatown and the other one is an embassy, right? So a Chinatown, they have their own post office, their own malls, their own banking. In an embassy, it's a sovereign territory in a host government. So take, for example, the U.S. Embassy right here in VI, right? It's a sovereign territory in a host government. We want to join 2 of those concepts together to get a sovereign Afrotown, right? So what does that look like? Let's zoom out, right? You're an Afropolitan citizen. You navigate the world with your Afropolitan passport. You're able to make payments for goods and services using the Afropolitan currency, and you're able to get physical entry into Afrotowns located across the world in major cities, right? And so for us, these things are possible when you think about it in disparate terms. What we're now doing is joining them together to create a holistic network state, right? And that is in a nutshell what the vision is.
That's quite a grand vision.
We have to be, I think as Africans, we've played it safe for too long, right? And we were talking about this earlier. I truly believe that this generation needs to be the most audacious generation that Africa's ever produced. Like,
I love that word.
No more time to play it safe.
It's time to leapfrog.
Leapfrog. And it's like, it has to be the most audacious, because I was just reflecting yesterday that I am so fortunate and happy to have grown up in an era of the most gifted Africans to ever walk the planet, right? I see it in fashion, I see it in art. And I think my multidisciplinary approach, where I did politics, I did law, I did entertainment because I was doing events and Afrobeats and all of that. I also did tech. So I have gone to really see in different fields the best of our best. And a lot of them are Afropolitan citizens today, right? And I think when I'm surrounded by that, I'm like, yo, we have to do more. We should do more. We should aspire for more. It's no longer enough to just play it safe and say, hey, we're going to go build the Airbnb for Africa just because we've seen Airbnb work in the West, or we're going to go build Uber for Africa because we've seen Uber. It's like, no. What is the thing that we innovate on and give to the world and say, this is from us, aside from our minerals that, get exploited, or our resources? Like, what is uniquely ours to give and to share to the world, where the world comes to and says, okay, you guys really put your footprint in this. And so for us, it's like, this is a pain point for us, because governance is a huge issue for Africans, right? This isn't an idea that could be as useful in someone like Switzerland, because if you were a Switzerland citizen, you have good roads. You have, like, if I came and said, hey, Demi, and we're both Swiss citizens, I'm like, hey, we need to start a new country. You'd be like, why? What's wrong with this one, right? But most of us who are African or Black,
we know the pain points.
We know the pain points, and these are visceral pain points, right? So for us, we're saying, how do we solve that in our generation, in our time, and how do we dream audaciously about this? What is that version of the world that we want to see, where Wakanda isn't just a movie, it's a reality, right? And we can achieve it within our time. It doesn't have to be something that's 100 years into the future.
Interesting. So what drives you, Eche? It's very apparent that you have a very audacious way of seeing the future of the African story, of the African value. What drives that in you?
I think in reflecting about it, what I would say is, I was supposed to be a lawyer. My dad is a lawyer. His granddad was a lawyer. My family, there's a lot of lawyers, judges. And I realized that being an entrepreneur was what I wanted to be, right? And an entrepreneur, you're a risk taker. Like, you're in the arena. You know what it feels like to risk something and fail a lot of the times, actually. But you feel the most alive, right? And I think for me, it's when I think through, one of the analogies I like to give is the Vikings. I don't know if you ever watch any of the Viking shows, but the whole process is, hey, where we're at is no longer working for us, but we're going to board the ships, and we might go into the unknown waters. We don't know what's out there. We can actually all drown. We can actually all die. Like, there's a reality on ground, but that the reward, if we do discover something, is like exponential, right? And I think for me, I'm the guy who would have boarded the ship, right? Because it requires a different sort of mindset to board that ship, to be in the arena, not to spectate, to just be in the arena and be like, hey, win, lose, draw, I'm here, I'm alive. I feel most alive doing this. And I think for me, I'm glad that most of the Afropolitans who've decided to come with us on this journey are the people who have that mindset, right? Because it's the adventurous mindset, it's the entrepreneurial mindset, it's the innovative mindset. It's like, hey, we're here to contribute. We're builders, right? And it's not just builders in tech, it's builders in art, it's builders in finance, it's builders in different sectors. And so, like, what drives me is just being in the arena of life. Like, I don't want to be somebody who watched it happen. I want to be in that arena at all times. And it's like, whether it's the losses that come, it's like, look, we're coming, like, it's like, go get patched up. We're coming right back. And it's like, you want to be in that game. And I think it was meeting people like Ian of Flutterwave back in the day, because I met him in San Francisco, and we went on a hike, me and some other people. And he was 25 at the time. And I remember I was 26. And I remember on my 26th birthday that year, because I met E like 2 months after that, I had promised myself, like, yo, my life is on cruise control. Like, the way it is I'm the first son I've gone to school. I have my bachelor's, I have my master's, I'm about to do law school. When people ask me how I'm doing, I tell them these things, but they serve as a substitute for me not really knowing what I want to do in my life, right? So the way Nigerians work is it's a status filled thing. Okay, yeah, you're in law school, so you're going to be a really great lawyer, so that means things are working out, so you're great. So you put away asking yourself the real tough questions about your life because of how you're being perceived. And I remember just being on my 26th birthday, like, I'm not taking risks in my life. This is cruise control, and that's not how I see myself. So come your next birthday, I want to see improvements. I want to see that you've risked something. I want to see that you've been uncomfortable, and what does that look like for you? And 2 months later, I met E, and we're going on this hike, and he's 25 years old. And E is full. I don't know if you've ever met him, but he's definitely somebody you should interview, but full of life, just, his vision of the world. And he was in the game. He had skin in the game, right? And I remember just being like, that's the game. That's the game I want to play right there. Audacious. It doesn't matter if you lose, if you win, if you draw, you're in the game and you're in the arena of life. And I think from that moment, my mindset and approach to things has been that, right? And I think for me, it was, I went to school where I was the only black kid, right? And what those white kids had was audacity for days. Like, it didn't matter what grades they got. I remember coming from Nigeria, they would beat us if we didn't get an A, right? They would literally flog you with a cane. And I remember I take a U.S. history exam over there, and those kids, I scored a 98, right? And the next person's like in the 70s or whatever. So I'm really there for the first time, like, oh, they're about to get caned or flogged. Nobody was getting caned. But it wasn't even that, because it's like sometimes, even if you don't get caned, there was shame that was attached to the grade. Like, I got no shame, no sadness. The bell rang for lunch break. These kids are jumping off the wall. I'm about to go to the car. I'm about to go do this. And I'm like, they're so full of life. They're so audacious. They're like, there's no fear. Like,
no fear.
And I'm like, yo, I want that. I want all of that, because whatever that is, it's the same type of mindset that says to someone, I want to go to the moon, and no one's flinching. Right? Because they're used and they've grown up in an environment that encourages that level of audacity. Right? And so for me, it's like, it just felt very, very, it was interesting to see, and I'm able to articulate this now because I'm older, but in that moment, I'm gaining all of this. I'm like, these kids are audacious. They embrace it. And it's not to say that they don't have any fears, but they lean into their fear. They lean into their edge. And that's what we need as Africans. That's where we need to be.
So as an entrepreneur myself, I very much understand that a lot of our drivers doesn't always come from a positive place. Sometimes it can come from a really dark place, right? A lot of the time, I probably say more time than none, our entrepreneurial journey was, are you okay there? Yeah. More time than none, our entrepreneurial journey it comes from us probably running away from something, right? We don't always necessarily know what we're running to, but we know we're running if you're really, really in tune with self, right? And you're really in touch with your actual person, there's typically something we're running from. Yeah. So I want to ask you, Eche.
It's a really good interview. You're a really great interviewer.
What are you running from?
So I'm not going to act and pretend like I don't go to therapy, and we're not had these discussions in therapy. But what I would say maybe I was running from, maybe I don't know if I'm actively still running from it because I'm more aware of it, was a sense of I didn't want my faith to be in the hands of any other person but me. And so whether that comes from a childhood in which I grew up with not as much affection, which was not intentional. It's just like how Nigerian parents are. So you learn how to self-sustain real quick. Like the pat on the back is not coming, so you pat yourself, right? I remember my grandma was like, I remember the first time I came, I was like, hey, I got second in a class of like 300 people. She's like, the person who have first have two heads. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. Like, so then that's not ever enough. So that
did that hurt?
So at the time, it wasn't like a crying thing, but I think it's something that like there's a ping where you're like, oh, nothing. Like even till today, I probably struggle to smell the roses because it's always like there's more to do. Like the person who come first have two heads, so there's always another like thing to go do. There's never a thing to like settle and be like, oh, this is enough. It's never enough. It's like, look, we gotta keep going. Because there's always some other mountain to climb, right? So that plays a role, but I would say like then that turns into whether it's other traumas that you face as a kid or childhood trauma, and you just make promises to yourself like I don't ever want to be powerless. I don't ever want to be helpless. I don't want to ever be in a situation where my destiny or my future is decided by people who are these people, right? And it's like, and then that freedom in of itself was a core value, right? Like the most corest of values of like, yo, our freedom or my freedom needs to be enshrined in code. So I know that when I think through the things that drive me or the things that informed what I'm running away from, I'm running away from powerlessness. I'm running away from helplessness. I'm running away from whatever the opposite of freedom is, right? And it's like, I don't want that. And I was telling a story the other day, because we both discovered, like a couple of us discovered that we almost went to or attended Faith Academy or Covenant University in Ogun State. And I remember I was telling them how I ended up not going there. And I think if my parents listen to this podcast, this is going to be the first time they hear this. But and I think I was about 12 years old or 11. And we go to Faith Academy. And I'd passed the entrance exam, but they have an interview. And the interview is over a 3-day orientation period. And I remember just getting to the school and just realizing, like, just viscerally realizing, like, this is not for me. But that, like, I know my parents are not going to, they're going to wave it away as the, like, things of a child. Like, what do you really know? We know what's best for you. But I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, Nigeria, I can take Nigeria and all these, but this particular place is viscerally against everything I stand for and everything I am. And so I remember just like, you know, it's an orientation, you're getting to fill out the school. I'm like, no. Like, this is just, first, whether it was, okay, you have to wear these uniforms or you have to do a voucher, you can't use actual money. It was like these stringent rules where I was like, no, and these people are going to break me. They're going to realize that, like, I'm the rebel, and they're going to institutionalize me and break me. And I'm like, I can't even let them get me into the school. So time for the interview, I think my parents are walking me to the interview room, and it's only me that I get to talk to. So as I'm walking, I'm just like, you know, good first son, I'm about to go do this. Don't worry, we're going to bring this back. As soon as that door closes, I change it for them. I'm like, hey, deny me.
Self-sabotage?
I was looking at the interview as 1, 2, 3, 2 men, 1 woman. Deny me from coming to your school.
You use those words?
Yeah. Their faces were
How old were you?
12.
Wow.
I was like, deny me. And they're like, why? I'm like, if you let me into the school, I'm the weapon that's fashioned. It's going to be me. Like, I'm giving you heads up. Don't let me come to the school. I don't want to be here. I don't deserve to be here. Don't allow me to come. Fail me. I don't want to be here. Like, deny me. I'm giving you a heads up. And I remember, like, in your life, there are all these moments of boldness that you can remember where you're like, I don't know.
How does a 12-year-old
find the words? But it was like, it was so visceral. Like, I do not want to be here. Deny me. And whatever I have to say or do, I want to leave no impression that I don't want to be here. I'm not going here. And so obviously I didn't end up going to the school, and we ended up coming back to Lagos. I ended up.
Did Mom and Dad ever find out?
They're going to find out from this podcast.
But the teacher never thought, or the interviewers never thought to call the parents in and say, your child is just sabotaged his entire application.
No, because they never mentioned it to me. And I know my parents would have been upset, right? They would have been deeply annoyed. Like, why would you do that? You know, so they're finding out from this podcast. This is the first time this is out there for the world, you know. But I remember that just being visceral about it. Like, look, this is not for this. They will take my freedom. They will take any sense of it away. They will strip me of my individuality. I don't want that.
So even at 12 years old, you knew that freedom was something that was incredibly valuable to you.
Core. And that's why I loved America, right? Like, even from all the books I read, like everything, I'm a history buff. Like, I'm talking about, like, there's not a lot about America that I haven't consumed and known. So that's why the disappointment of when you finally move there and realize, like, oh, these people are not living up to their own ideals, number one. But number two, they're not even courageous enough to live up to it. That's even the worst part, because it's like, if you're continuously striving, I understand. But when you're like, yo, we can't even have a conversation about your history without it turning into something, oh, let's not talk about that, or slavery was such a long time ago, or this. I'm like, you don't have the courage to face up to the actions of your past. So then how can you move
past it and move forward
on and thrive on, right? And so to me, it's like that original sin of them not being able to just embrace and address their problems has compounded over time, where it doesn't matter how.
What do you mean by they? Who are you referring to?
So, I mean, just the American institution, American people in general, right?
Is it particularly Black America, or?
It could be both sides, but mostly white America, right?
Okay.
And I think I give an example. Germany, for example, you go to Germany. I've never really been, but I've heard like you go there. They're actually monuments to the Holocaust, right? Like they address it. It's not something that they've tried to wipe from their history. It's a fact of history, and whatever shame or reconciliation or guilt that they had to face, they faced it, and then they can now move on and say, okay, we will not do that again, but we're going to go on and thrive. When you're a country and you're a society that's not able to do that, that's problematic, because that means the truth is not something that you value here, because the truth is subjective. We can have subjective interpretations of it, but it's an objective fact that these things did happen. And it doesn't mean that your generations that come have to move around with their heads in shame all the time, but it is a fact that needs to be addressed. And you can address it whether it's through reparations or in ways that show that you believe that there was something that was done in a wrong manner here, and you're trying to address it, and people can heal from that. And I think that that's another thing. It's like, how does healing happen in society if there's no accountability? You know, and that was the
other way.
process.
So what I'm hearing is that for you, it's almost like you need to face the ugly truth of the man in the mirror in order for you to be free from him, right? That's what I'm hearing. What you're saying. So I the story of America and your experience there. How does that play into your business mindset today? Because what I'm seeing is a little boy who learned about the world from books. Right, who delved into the stories, and then having gone into one of those worlds, was able to navigate it from a storytelling point of view, to either confirm a lot of your preconceptions or some of the ideas that you learned, and interpret the reality that was actually on ground in men. But what have you taken from that world that you think now generally informs your business mindset? From the point of view of freedom?
Yeah, I would say that a couple of things. I think audacity is also a theme that keeps coming up, which is when something, I now know that the way my brain is primed, it's not to say that I don't feel fear or I'm not fearful, but that once I feel, like for example, I remember with the Afropolitan idea, I woke up at 5 a.m. in Nairobi, I'm pacing the room, and it's like my brain is like calculating, like it's just one of those like lucid ass moments where it's like doing the whole thing. And I remember just being like, oh, this is scary. Like this, I felt fear. And then it was like, as I felt the fear, because I'm pacing the room, because I'm coming to all the conclusions, I'm doing the thing of, this is the idea that you have, this is what you think can work, but this is also why people will laugh at you, and this is why people will drag you, this is what they will say. And I played the entire movie in my head. And I'm like, damn, that's scary. Like you're risking everything, your name, your reputation, everything. You're putting it all on this. And I remember feeling the fear, right? And I remember knowing that I was fearful. And then the minute I accepted that there was fear here, that's when I knew I was going to do it. So it's almost like the more something is an unknown and the more something is more scary, that's the time when I'm like, okay, that's where we're going. Because then it's very counterintuitive, because I'm like, okay, then this is what's going to make the ride even much better, because it's a process, it's a journey, but that's why we're going to go do it. And I think for me, I would say themes like audacity, themes like unknown, themes like skin in the game, right? It's not just enough to say, hey, this is what we're going to do as an entrepreneur. You have to have skin in the game. Like it cannot be, oh, I want to do this, but I outsource. It's just like you doing this podcast now, and you're like, oh no, but somebody else is going to be sitting here doing an interview while your name and everything else is attached to it. It's like not necessarily. Like you have skin in the game. When it fails, when it works, when it succeeds, you know what that whole process looks like, because that's the only thing, that's how you can measure it, right? So I would then even say like what America taught me throughout its entire time with being in that environment was, it rewards the most audacious people. Like wherever it is, it's like you come in here, you have to have the audacity to earn the right to play in this game, right? And it's like, you want to play it safe? Sure, go do that, no problem. But the more audacity you have and you're really committed about that audacity, it rewards it a bit more than any other environment on the planet.
But why did you come back to Nigeria?
So I think what happens is the epiphanies, right? If you want to play wealth creation games at a real level, and then let's say you're a black person, it's not to say you can't make it there, you can't have money, but the truly generational impact that you're looking for is on the continent, right? It's why you see some of the white people coming here, right? You see all peoples of all races coming here because this is the last frontier, right? And in the world that has still not been developed.
Say that again.
This is the last, Africa is the last frontier, right? Where there are places you go to and things have still not been touched. You can still shape it, you can still create it, you can still build it, right? And I think for me, it's America has been on the decline. And if you're tuned into that, it's almost like I can give that allegory of the cave analogy again, but I can just give a simpler one, which is picture a man who thinks the mountaintop is the destination. And then he gets to the mountaintop and he's like, oh, it's not as cracked up as it was meant to be. And my purpose isn't even here. And so then he starts walking back down the mountain. And then as he's walking, he's seeing people who are walking up and everyone is like, what are you doing? Like, that is the thing. And it's like, I give that analogy like the Japa wave in Nigeria. It's like everyone's definitely heading to the embassies and like, how can I get out of the country? How can I do that? And then you have some other people who are like coming back to the country because they've eaten, right? They've reached the mountaintop. They're not hungry. And now they've eaten. They're like, oh, like the purpose was here. And then it's like, we're doing this thing and you have to know what game you're in, right? Because when you're playing life games or purpose games, it cannot be dictated by like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do or this is what looks good on paper. It's like, no, what is authentic to you, right? And I think when I come back to Nigeria, I am reminded, I meet people like you. Last night I was around other builders. There's an energy here that's more hustle, innovative, people who are looking to build the future. Whereas in America, I would say from a diaspora perspective, too many people are comfortable. And it's not no fault of theirs. It's just more of like, when you're fled poverty and fled scarcity, you just want to rest. You want to eat. And the thing is, I know Mandem have eaten, at least where I was from in the Bay Area, they've eaten for a while. These are a lot of people who earn like 6-figure salaries. They're comfortable, right? Like, but my thing was, okay, when we've eaten, maybe you take 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, what next? And I think we're in our what next phase globally as Africans. Like, what next? Where do we go from here? We know the pain points. They've been around for 60 plus years. What is it going to take for us to get to that next level? And who are the type of people who are going to have to organize around shared values and around in a borderless way that transcend some of these issues? So for me, I was like, that's no longer America. Like, you can't, school shootings, police brutality, like stuff that like, this is a civilized society. What are we talking about, right? 6-year-olds shooting teachers. Where did we get here? And the fact that this is even something up for debate, it's a society that's divided. It's a nation that's divided, and it's going downhill. There's no up from here. This is just where it's going. And so for me, I don't like first world expenses with third world solutions. You know what I mean? In Nigeria, at least, we can say third world, and then third world everything. It's reflective. No problem. It's reflective.
Yes.
Here, you're giving me first world expenses, and everything is first world this, but the infrastructure is failing. The airlines don't work. The airplanes, and you're like, yo, this is not working. Like, there's something fundamentally broken in this society. And I think it stems from the original sin being compounded over time, because they can't even address something as realistic as these were the things that we did. And then instead they want to erase history from schools, right? Oh, don't teach critical race theory. Don't teach this. I'm like, how is a nation as powerful with these ideals? Like, I don't think your founding fathers would have shrunk from the reality of things, but this is where we're at, right? And your founding fathers were men who, not perfect, definitely a lot of them slave owners, but when they put pen to paper, they changed the world, right? All men are created equal. We're imbibed with these things. Like, we hold this to be self-evident. Bro, when I'm a kid, I'm reading all of that, you cannot tell me nothing. I'm like, yo, America is the shit. Like, this is the Kool-Aid. But then you go there and you're like, they've lost their way. They lost their way a long time ago. And I think, what would it look like for us to build the more perfect union that they were looking for, but this time from an African perspective and for African needs?
The roadmap that you've sort of followed in your journey so far, and the mistakes that you've made along the way.
Yeah,
if you were teaching those mistakes to somebody who was just embarking on that journey themselves, what would be the top 3 things you tell them to completely avoid doing?
Yeah.
Based on your own experience.
I would say ambition.
What
That's
about
one thing. I would say surround yourself with more ambitious people, right? Have a circle of people who are either more ambitious than you or just similar ambitions, because what happens is when your environment definitely can inform your perspective, right?
You think that's a mistake that you made?
I think for the first couple of years in my life, from I would say 18 to about 26 when I met E, I was not surrounded by the most ambitious people. And what that then does is you become the kid who's the smartest, but you dumb yourself down because you don't want to rock the boat. And it's like, but when you get into a league of people who are smarter, more ambitious, you're like, okay, cool. Like, I fit in here and I'm able, because I don't see intelligence as a threat. I've never met any man who was more intelligent, or any woman who was more intelligent, and felt like I'm intimidated by them. I'm inspired by them, right? So excellence doesn't intimidate me, it inspires me. So when you're in those rooms, you're like, okay, when you dream and when you bring out ideas, nobody tells you, oh, that's too big, or that how are you going to do that? They're like, it's not even big enough. Like, what are we talking about here? And I think it's something that being in Silicon Valley, I was grateful for, because you're around founders and people who've changed the world. And so when you bring ideas out, they're more likely to embrace it because they're like, it's not even big enough, right? They are pushing the boundaries of what our humanity calls for, right? I would say, so that's one. So ambition, like really surround yourself with people. 2 is really self-awareness, right? Like get into therapy early. If you can afford it, get into it. Sleep that every day. Like if you can't, your therapist should be your best friend. Like get in there, because like.
Is that strange for you to say as a man?
No, I've been doing this for a while. No, I've been in therapy for a minute. Like it's not even, it's not like my whole, at least the last 10 years has been on a journey of more self-discovery, more self-awareness, and just being able to see both the great sides of you and the ugly sides of you, and have a genuine, authentic conversation about it, and not necessarily run away from it. It's like, this is who I am. You might not have your reasons, but this is my reality, right? And I think therapy just helps. It compounds so much, because you're able to see yourself for what you are, and then you're able to see yourself as what you hope to be, and then you have to close that gap, right? But I've found that it's hard to have conversations with people if they're not self-aware, right?
It's one of the most difficult things you can do.
Yeah.
And I probably say it's even one of the bottlenecks of founders, because you can't avoid dealing with people.
Of course.
And I think that's the thing that creates the biggest gap between you and the teams that you're trying to build. Because self-awareness is very, very key.
It's key
in creating clarity between a team that can excel. Self-awareness is a huge skill to bring to the table for any team.
It's huge. I always find that, like, when you have a team that's self-aware and you're able to just give feedback, as is obviously you don't be toxic, but like if they're able to also take it on and be like, okay, yeah, he was right, or she was, it helps, because then you know that we're having an authentic conversation here. But if there's no self-awareness, then if you're pointing out something to me and I'm taking it personally versus really listening to what you're saying, we can't move forward, right? Because then my ego is more important than the mission.
Yeah. And number 3?
Number 3, oh man, mistakes are so plenty. I would say the role of vulnerability, right? I think and the role it plays in your life, because I think for me, for the longest, I always used to think that being a good friend was judged by how much you didn't burden anyone. So
okay, I'm gonna need a minute to break that down.
So like if the best friends were people who did not come with burdens, like, look, I'm not gonna ask you for money, I'm not gonna do this, I'm not gonna disturb you for this, I'm not gonna do that. So that when I thought about friendship, it was or even family or whatever, it was from a thing of don't be a liability or don't be a responsibility, right? Just contribute and help and maybe be the one who's driving the car, but don't be any of these things. I remember stumbling on Brené Brown and her, I don't know if you know who Brené Brown is.
She's one of my favorites. Yeah, so The Art of Vulnerability.
You already know. And I think it really helped shape, because at the time I was going through a weird thing with friends where I'm like, wait, I don't stress you for anything. So what possible issues could we potentially have? And then you come to realize, because when she says about like, it's our imperfections that make us like grow our bonds, not the perfections of like, yo, I'm perfect and, you know, I'm strong and I'm this macho guy. And you're like, oh, right, like it's counterintuitive. Like a lot of these things are just counterintuitive, where you're thinking, well, if I'm not stressing you and if I show up when you need me to show up, I don't understand. This is a good deal for you. But you're like, no, but that's not life. Like life isn't about us being in the bubbles and, you know, you nothing bothers you. You're Eche, you're this, you nothing. It's like, no, it's the imperfections that make your bonds better. It's being able to even cry, being able to share your sorrow, your pain, your joy, and in a very authentic way that leads to more, you know, in-depth relationships. And I think I would layer that by saying there's a difference between chasing the breadth of things versus the depth of things. And I would say like young Eche was somebody, so breadth of things. So for example, it could be, you could know what it feels like to sleep with 8 women in 1 year. That's breadth. You could also not know what it feels like to be with 1 woman for 8 years. That's depth, right? And the lessons of both are different, right? And I think for me, freedom was such a core thing for me, where I always thought freedom was freedom from responsibilities, right? But I'm learning that the more authentic freedom is freedom through commitment, right? The thing that you choose to do, that you're able to say like, hey, I'm focused on this. I'm singularly focused on this, and this is what I do. This is what I'm committed to, and that compounds over time. And in doing that, your freedom expands because of that, right? And I think for me, it was for the longest time, I'm the kid who has wide eyes. Like I'm like optionality. I'm someone who understands the reason why the options are important. The optionality is important because I don't want to ever be caged or not have options. I get that on a visceral level, right? I even showed that when I was 12. But then the thing now I'm learning is you also want the freedom to choose your chains, right? And then what you have to figure out is, what are those chains? What are those chains where it's like, yeah, I lucked in here, I committed to this, and this is what I chose. And because if you go through life avoiding the commitment, your freedom is not, it's not that sweet. Because it's like, there's no meaning to it. There's no impact to it. So now you have to figure out what your freedom through commitment is. And it's okay if you take time. Like I remember one of the books I read, The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, and he says there are 3 important things young people should spend time really thinking about: what you do, who you do it with, and where you live, right? And I think as you start to think through what those mental frameworks are for you, you have to be able to realize the moment when you've met something that was what putting everything on. So that moment for me came in December 23, 2021 in Nairobi, Kenya at 5 a.m. when I was like, I have found the thing that I will risk my whole life for. Skin in the game, whole thing. The laughter, the smirks, the mocking, the joy, whatever it is, it's like the one thing where for the first time in my life, I don't have to hedge anything. I put all the chips and put it to the middle of the table, and it's like, whatever life has to offer me with this, win, lose, draw, this is what I'm doing. And I think that I can say that now because I've evolved. But before that, it was, okay, hedge the bets. Okay, just do this and then do that. And then it's like, no, like you're never going to get the returns you want if you play it that safe. Most of the returns in life come from compound interest, and it compounds based on how much you've put in with skin in the game, and then you get rewards from that. So, yeah.
So let's go back to the last advice, which is the vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
In your journey and the process that you've gone through, and the moments where you discover that vulnerability was something that you were not taking heads on, right? What was the catalyst that came into it that made you realize that, wait, I'm not actually using my vulnerability here effectively enough, because there are benefits here that I'm probably restricting myself from experiencing, more so than the person who's witnessing my vulnerability.
Yeah.
There's a freedom that is also attached to my vulnerability. What happened? What was the incident that made you come to that conclusion?
I don't know if there's a particular incident, but it could probably be relationships, right, with friendships. But I think the role of intimacy, right, because vulnerability lives with intimacy, right? Intimacy cannot necessarily exist without vulnerability, right? And I think what I was realizing too was I would be having wins, and whether it was the congratulations I was receiving from people or from myself were just hollow. So it was like I now started to get to the point where I didn't even want to share the wins, because either the wins were coming at such a rapid clip, and then it was like the congratulations were not banging anymore, because it's like, yo, it's like, okay, like, but that, like, there was no connection. And so there was an intimacy problem. And I was like, okay, like, that's when I watched Brené Brown, I got it immediately. Like, you just watch it, you're like, oh, that's right
what
there.
That is,
that's what that is. And what I realized was I was, like, there's a perfect quote from Naval where he says, you're going to fix the world, but your family is broken. And I'm like, rah. You feel me? Because it's like, you talk about what you're running away from, right? Like, you're running away from confronting the actual issue, but you want to fix the world, because if you fix the world, maybe it fixes your family. But have you spent time talking to your brother, to your mom, to your sister? When was the last time you spoke to them? Like, have you actually addressed your family? But you want to change the world. Like, that's the thing, right? But it's like, maybe you start off first by the people who are closest to you, and then you're able to expand. And I think for me, it was realizing the paradox of that, which was you're running away from something. You're not as vulnerable as you can be. And it's not vulnerability from an oversharing perspective, because she always says oversharing is not vulnerability. But it's that I have found over the last 2 years or 3 years that my relationship with my family has gotten better, because I've been more intentional about actually sitting and listening and talking and trying to hear them out. It's not to say that it's perfect, but you're now realizing all the things you've missed because you were looking outside all the time and there was no internal looking. And I think it's still something I struggle with. I'm not even going to say that, but I am googly-eyed about the world. Like, I'm somebody whose eyes are like, the books, like I see that so clearly. But then when it's like right here, like
it's
when
difficult to
it's
see.
like, I'm like, what's going on? Like, and I think what usually hurts for families or friends is they know I do have the capacity, because when I turn and look at them, they know that they're seen, but it doesn't happen as often as it should, because Eche is off trying to do something about the world, and internally it's like, and that's something I know I have to work on it in therapy, working on it. But there's that sense of when I do see you, I've seen you, right? But when I'm not seeing you, you don't know if you're seen. And I think it's the balance of recognizing what's really important, right? And I think another quote that I always reflect on, there are always these like 3 quotes I reflect on that always make me laugh with these things. It says, a fit body, a calm mind, a house full of love. These are things that cannot be bought. They need to be earned, right? And I think I've seen so many examples of men who chased the financial success, and your son doesn't love you.
At the detriment of
nobody comes to Thanksgiving. Your house is eerie, right? And there's no house full of love. There's no calm mind. There's no fit body. And realizing that, like, while you're chasing these successes, make sure you don't lose sight of what's actually really important. And sometimes it's hard to maintain that balance, because you're like, oh, like, I'm doing this, I'm accomplishing this, I'm doing that. But then you're not realizing that the time you're spending away, people are also living their lives. They're learning how to go about their lives without you being present. And so when you decide to be present, it might be too late, right? And it's one of those things where there are sacrifices to be made, but it's just more of like, be conscious of the sacrifices that you are actually sacrificing. Because sometimes it's, oh, but if I had known that it came with this, I might have not done this as much.
Is it avoidable?
Balance. Yeah, it's definitely avoidable. You just have to be conscious of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes me beg the question: is it possible for us to have this magnitude of a drive and ambition to change the world, and to have real lasting impact, or to make lasting impact, and still be able to have everything else that encompasses having a having the balance, right? Having that house full of love and having the children who adore you, and having that sound mind, because entrepreneurship sometimes, a lot of the time, feels like you're going against the grain anyway, right? you are toxically ambitious.
Yes,
I think that's the way I'm gonna word it. It's not healthy, and I guess sometimes it's kind of negotiating pretty much every day how far you're going to go along that line, how close are you going to tread to that line. Sometimes you probably go a little bit and then you're able to pull back. Some people go so far they can never come back. So these are the ones we're talking about. You know, by the time you come back, the family's no longer there. They've moved on with their lives. They've accomplished the capacity to live without you, and they've accepted it to the point where they don't even want to go back. They're not interested. They've moved on. So when you're treading that line, how do you kind of consolidate that guilt? I guess, is it guilt? Would it be guilt? That, you know, I'm chasing this ambition, but mum hasn't spoken to me in 2 weeks. Or I have spoken to mum, but my conversations are very rushed. I'm rushing her off the phone. She wants to talk about the most mundane things that's happened in her day. And you just don't have
mundane time.
You don't have mundane time, and you're given literally 5% of your concentration. And I've had moments like this, and I have to reconcile the guilt that it comes with that. But I also understand that, yes, there has to be some sort of sacrifice. But how do you know when to cut the line off the sacrifice, when to draw it back?
I think that's why it's important to admit when you need help, right? That's why therapy plays such a role. Also establishing boundaries, right? So it's being able to, so I know now, like when I go out, like I'll take my parents out to eat, and I know it's something that is valuable for me, because I'm like, I don't know how long we have together. So if I'm there, maybe I'm not on my phone, we're actually having a conversation. So that 30 minutes of quality time is better than 4 hours of non-quality time, right? And so that's when I feel poured into, or whether I'm pouring into them, but that then becomes something I value. And then being intentional about the calls, right? So it's like, hey, if you can maybe make it a calendar thing, and it's like, hey, this is when I'm going to actually go. There are ways that you can get help that allow you to, it doesn't feel mechanical, and you're hopefully more present. Because I do know that after Brené Brown in my life, I'm more present. Like before that, it was, bruh, Demi, you could not catch. Like it was like my mind was always everywhere else but the present. And my mom would consistently say it, like, you're around, but you're not here.
You're not really here.
You're not here. So I think now it's being able, obviously the phones too, like you just can't let them dictate your life. I think I'd say I turn off all notifications, right? So I check it. When I check, if I see it, I respond to it, but I'm no longer dictated by somebody has sent me something and I have to respond to it immediately. It's like, no, like I can maybe when I came to this app, it was 2 days after. Sure. Like the relationship with time also has to change, because you want to prioritize the quality time over the quantity, the time limit, you know? So I think it's possible. And I think also, like, I think part of being an entrepreneur is you have to also believe that everything is out there. Like I don't ever see it as like, I think I'm fully on the have my cake and eat it train, which is different from like, it must be that way, because it doesn't always happen, but it's the striving of it. Like the striving cannot stop. I cannot ever stop striving for the have my cake and eat it. Like, why not?
That's part of the fun. That's the game.
Part of the fun. That's the game. What are we doing here? Like, so it's like, I want to be just as ambitious, and I want a house full of love, and I want a calm mind, and I also want a fit body. I want it all.
I feel like the win for me isn't actually attempting to have it all. Does that make sense?
It's in the attempt.
It's the attempt. But in your attempt, you need to have balance.
Of course.
So it wouldn't be a great attempt if you're just chasing the bag. Yeah. But the fact that you're even attempting to have that balance in itself is
the win.
Is the win.
Is the win, because it gives, and there's the meaning that comes from that.
And you put the same level of passion that you put into one that you put into the other. So the passion that I want to change the world is the same passion I'll use for having a conversation with my mother. And I just wanted her to just literally collapse in laughter. Right? That is my goal, to make her laugh so much. I want her to just enjoy that 15 minutes, 30 minutes interaction that I have with her, to the point where I'm feeding her what she needs, and I'm getting it back in return automatically. But at the same time, it's not so much about I'm with her or I'm there, but I'm actually with her type of thing, you know?
There's a book called The Way of the Superior Man, and I read it a lot. I go back to it to reference
You're reading some really good books out here. You need to send some stuff. I want you to give us your top 3 books that you're reading this year, or even do you know what?
I've read.
Once you've read, okay. So your top 3 that you've read that our listeners probably should tap into.
Like foundational books. I would say the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. I cannot recommend this book enough. It's a guide to happiness and wealth. It was a book that gave me a foundational understanding and framework to operate and do business by too. But also the other part where it's like, because at the end of his advice it says, and when you've achieved all these things, you will realize that it wasn't what you wanted or were chasing in the first place. And you don't want to know how many times I've come to the mountaintop in different areas of my life, and I was like, oh, this is what it was, and I get there and I'm like,
that's not it.
It's not it. So what is it? And it's like, we gotta go do this again, right? And it's like that consistent reinvention, but you're realizing now that is just a life. Like your seasons of your purpose can change, right? So you can be in a season of this, and then there's another season you have to go into, and then there's another season you have to go into, and you have to recognize that this is the process, right? So the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. The second one is The Way of the Superior Man. I think it's a book that I believe definitely every man should read, every woman should read as well.
Okay, I was gonna say,
and because it talks about the difference between, like with men, it's like there's a way we approach the world sometimes where it's very toxic, and we have to unlearn a lot of behaviors, right? If we're going to be good fathers or good husbands, like, or even just being able to interact with women in general, right? And I remember whether it's understanding the difference between your masculine energy or your feminine energy, the difference between hearing what your woman is saying and hearing what she's feeling, and knowing the difference between the two. Because sometimes if you're going off what she's saying, you're like, wait, but you said Tuesday, but this actually happened on Wednesday, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, don't get lost in the semantics of what she's saying. What is she feeling? And if you hear what she's feeling, you hear it very, very clearly. I'm feeling frustration. I'm feeling anger. I'm feeling desperation. I'm feeling hope. I'm feeling joy. That then you hear it. She's articulating herself quite clearly, right? And I think that plus Brené Brown books. I think the third one, which maybe which one? Daring to be Great, right? By Brené Brown. She has a book like that. But yeah, because I think the way I group books is, it's about frameworks, like how do you mental models, how do you see the world, and how do these things fit into your mental models, because you're still always building out those mental models, because it helps you navigate the world, right? And then shows, like I'm a real Vikings show person, like just the idea of just going into the unknown, right? Even when the British or the people came to the New World in America, it's like that, who are the people who would enter that ship? That's an entrepreneur.
What is reading giving you?
It reminds me of who I am. It's like you read books that remind you of who you are, right? And that reinforce that for you, right? So it's like, what are the books that you read, and when you read them, they're like, okay, it's still me. I'm still me. I'm not forgetting who I am, because there have been times in my life that I forgot who I was, right? Whether it's in relationships that did not go as well, and you come out of it and you're like, yo, what is my favorite color? Like, I don't know. Like, I lost myself in this, right? And I no longer know who I am. So I literally have to do the journey of picking up the pieces again and vowing to myself, because you take these vows like, I will never lose myself in another relationship ever again. Like, it's just not going to be a thing.
How many times do you think you've betrayed yourself?
In that particular thing,
yes,
just that once, but just in general, I mean, probably all the time, all the time, because it's like you make these promises to yourself, and then for whatever reason you compromise and you say this, or like, oh, this is gonna be this is gonna be that. But for the most part, I think what I came to understand about foundationally for me is, what are my cores, right? The freedom is a core. The solitude is a core. The audacity has to be a core. Like all these core things, so that when I meet people, or when I was dating before, marriage, it's, oh, we're not aligned. And that before I wasn't filtering for alignment. I wasn't filtering, like you can filter for compatibility. It's also not necessarily filtering for alignment. Like, do we see the world the same way? I love to travel. I love to be in unknown. Can we operate from that? Or is this something that's going to be a problem for you? And I think even with the freedom thing is like some people say that they understand freedom until it's too much freedom. It's like, oh yeah, please, like come back here. Like I need to control, do something like that. So I think these are cores for me, right? And those are things I try and hope not to betray. And I think when it comes down to the arena, like actually being in the arena, because it's not about the losses, it's not about loving the wins or the draws. It's really about just knowing what it feels like to be in that arena of life. Win, lose, or draw. We're here. We knew what it felt like to triumph. We know what it felt like to fail. We know what it felt like to be mocked. We know what it felt like to be laughed at. We knew what it felt like to be celebrated with. The entire emotional roller coaster, that's where I want to be.
Eche, do you know what? That was brilliant. I'm feeling a little bit of fire just boiling, just kind of just like being fed inside of me, just listening to you. I really hope that has been inspiring for you guys. You know, one thing that I've definitely taken from this session with Eche is identifying your foundational cores, right? Laying them down and then teaching yourself how to circle back, to always find them in those moments where you just feel a little bit lost or you start questioning why you're doing this. So I think just starting off your journey, laying that foundation right, finding ways to always be able to sort of hold yourself accountable so you do not betray yourself. And even in moments of betrayal, learning how to find your way back. I think it's incredibly powerful how he uses books to be able to achieve that for himself. And for those of you who are out there who are watching this episode and you feel like, you know what, this journey is intimidating, this journey is this, but you can also hear from us that as difficult as it is, those foundational cores is always the anchor that we use to get ourselves back to ourselves. So guys, I really hope this episode has been insightful for you. I hope that you have taken from it what I have. It's powerful. I'm feeling energized. I'm feeling excited. So as per usual, guys, please do take care of yourselves and please don't forget to be extraordinary in the way that only you can be. Take care. Bye.